to your host.
You know that you're back with David Mackey's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button, or maybe there's a Patreon link there, or any other. You can send checks. You can do anyway. Basically, you'll find a way to be able to donate, and you can actually access the archives for free now, which is fantastic. Do that. And download our shows, or all the host shows for that matter, and then binge. Yes, binging is good. We're going to thank you, Mathis, Mackey and I, we're going to thank you for listening to us on Revolution Radio. It's been 10 years, where this is the 11th year we're in and on air. And it's been an amazing journey for both Becky and I. We've learned a lot having to do research for all the things we've done research for, and in the past we hadn't put that much time invested the research. We've been doing it ad hoc, but now we have a reason to do it. And we really thank you for being there with us, and thanks for inviting us into your lives so you can hear the ideas that we have and what we present to you. And we're going to ask you to get yourself some merch, maybe. That's another way to contribute to the station, and you can get a t-shirt or a mug or anything else you like, and it's really cool. I found out there's also iTunes or something like that, another method of listening to it. So it's got a dial-in listen if you're in the US, which is really cool. There is you just click on the station. There's a whole bunch of other apps that you can get or utilize to look for Revolution Radio Studio A, and then you can listen to us. And if you're listening to the archives on YouTube, that's one of our places we have archives, because we do present things that can't be stored in the MP3. So we have I'll cut to a screen that I'm looking at, or something, a web page or something that supports what we're talking about, because we're not just reading from them, but we have opinions around them based around the outside, and it all goes into a very large piece of work that it interconnects all of our ideas. There's a lot of things that happen during the day that we don't throw into this mix, but if it was a big cooking pot, there's all these stories that come in, and they're all from different areas, and some of these amaze you, just like in the previous hour, where it's pardon me, I still got this flu. It's really hard to get rid of this cough. What we have is a bunch of narratives, and we've established another show called Plato's Cave, where the message that they teach you through the media or the government directly doesn't match what's really going on in the background. So that's Plato's Cave. But this is Shiny Side Out with David Mackey. And we're halfway through show number 543. Mackey is currently on mute, and we're talking about false flags. Now, a false flag or a black flag is an event which is being orchestrated to be able to blame somebody else for it in order to achieve an objective. So the objective could be, you would like to go to war against another country, but they're not warring against you, haven't inflicted any damage against you. So you might pretend, blow something up, and then blame them for it. And then go, look, everyone, they did it. And of course, the other party is going, we did what? Do what? We didn't do that. And of course, the history books are written by the winners, not the losers. So if you were confident enough and won the battle, that the entire thing could disappear. One of the things that was admitted by the US government was the Bay of Tonkin. You need to do some research and discover what that means. And once you've done that, then all of this will start to make sense. Now I'm going to commence in Mackey's absence, and this is point 3 of a multiple point famous historical false flag events. So we've done Nero, Christians in the Great Fire of Rome, Remember the Maine, To Hell with Spain. Now this is the Manchurian incident. The economic slump following 1929's thorough and convincing near obliteration of Wall Street hit Japan especially hard. Exports fell, unemployment rose. Japan, not being rich in natural resources, needed oil and coal to make power to run machines, to produce goods, to sell to other countries, to make money, to buy food, to have enough energy. Manchuria, a province of China, had its fair share of oil and coal. After Japan decided it needed to invade Manchuria, they needed a pretext to justify the invasion. They chose to create a false flag attack on a railway close to Luitao Lake, a big flat area that had no military value to either Japanese or the Chinese. The main reason the spot was chosen was for its proximity. It was only about 800 meters away from Chinese troops stationed at, I'm going to mispronounce this one for sure, Bidaying. The Japanese press labeled the no-name site of the blast Lititiaogo, which was Japanese for Lititiao Bridge. There was no bridge there, but the name helped convince some the sabotage was a strategic Chinese attack. Colonel Ataki Sashiro, a Lieutenant Colonel Kanji Ishiwara, ordered officers of the Shimamoto, that's better, regiment to place a bomb beneath the tracks. The original bomb failed to detonate and a replacement had to be found. Then, at 10:20 p.m., September 18th, 1931, the tracks were blown. Surprisingly, the explosion was minor. Only one side of the rail was damaged, and the damage was so light that a train headed for Shenyang passed by only a few minutes later. But it was good enough. It was a good enough excuse to invade. The Japanese immediately charged the Chinese soldiers with the destruction, then invaded Manchuria. A puppet government known as Manchukuo was installed. The League of Nations investigated, and in 1932, report denied that the invasion was an act of defense, as Japan has advertised or had advertised. But rather than vacate Manchuria, Japan decided to vacate the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations. And Mackie's still not with us. Good grief. Oh, there he is. Number 4, Mackie, The Secrets of the Reichstag Fire.
Yes. It's interesting how the timing works out, because in 1932, obviously, Japan left the League of Nations. Yeah, the Reichstagsfire. In 1933, just a week before general elections that might place enough Nazis in office to make Hitler the de facto dictator, the Reichstag, which housed the parliament of the German Empire, was set on fire. Now, there weren't enough, so the Nazis didn't get enough seats to actually rule by themselves, so that they were in a coalition government with Hindenburg. Hindenburg was president, but he was very old, and he trusted Hitler was chancellor, but it was a coalition government. So people didn't wait overwhelmingly for the Nazi party, so we're all clear on that. But what happened with the Reichstagsfire is curious. Adolf Hitler assured everyone that communist terrorists started the fire. Hitler's party member Hermann Göring stated that he had secret evidence that would soon be made public, evidence that the communists had done it. These proclamations came on top of weeks of Nazi-organized street violence designed to whip the public into a pathological fear of communists. The next day, the Nazis, or the Nazi party, convinced, well, yeah, it says here, a senile president von Hindenburg, he was old, senile is probably a little disrespectful, but he was old, and like I said, he trusted Hitler. Anyway, they convinced President von Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag's decree. The decree, using defense against terrorism as an excuse, suspended just about every major civil liberty set forth in the Weimar Constitution. It was called the Notstandsgesetz, which means, best way, probably emergency laws. Okay, they were passed. Now, what was suspended? Habeas corpus, the right to know why you're being put in jail. Gone. Freedom of opinion. Gone. Freedom of the press. No more. Freedom to organize and assemble. If you like to be deported, yes. The Reichstag's decree, the Notstandsgesetz, even allowed the government to spy on its own citizens, personal mail and telephone conversations without a warrant. Something most Americans today could hardly begin to fathom, even though we know that that ship has sailed for you guys. A precursor to President George W. Bush's secret order in 2002, telling the National Security Agency to do just the very same thing in America. So what about the fire? The only thing historians seem to agree on is that Marinus van der Lubbe, a former Dutch communist and mentally disturbed arsonist hungry for fame, was found inside the building. Despite the Nazi attempts to blame the fire on a group of communists, the communists were later acquitted by the Nazi government themselves. After years of extensive investigation, most historians believe that Hitler's followers themselves set fire to the Reichstag using van der Lubbe as their patsy. They knew a nut was going to try to burn down the building, and not only did they let him do it, but they may have befriended him, encouraged him, and even helped the blaze spread by scattering gasoline and incendiaries.
Schultz, what are you doing?
Nothing!
I see nothing.
Well, most Germans, feeling safe from terrorism again, didn't mind that their freedom and liberty had been stolen, or that so much of their life and work had become so strictly controlled. Does that sound at all familiar?
Yes. Why did you help them, Schultz? Well, there wasn't enough of them to get the job done. Oh, goodness me, that's funny. The fake invasion of, is it Gleiwitz?
Gleiwitz, that's it.
Gleiwitz, okay. In the late evening of Thursday, August 31, 1939, German covert operatives pretending to be Polish terrorists seized the Gleiwitz radio station in the German/Poland border region of Silesia. The station's music program came to an abrupt halt, followed by frantic German voices announcing that Polish formations were marching towards town. Germany was being invaded by Poland. Then, like a bad imitation of the previous year's infamous War of the Worlds broadcast, the transmission went dead, at least for a moment of dramatic silence. In no time, radio stations across Greater Europe picked up the story. The BBC broadcast this statement: there have been reports of an attack on a radio station in Gleiwitz, which is just across the Polish border in Silesia. The German news agency reports, I'm putting even more accent, reports that the attack came about at 8 p.m. this evening, when the Poles forced their way into the studio and began broadcasting a statement in Polish. Within a quarter of an hour, says reports, the Poles were overpowered by German police, who opened fire on them. Several of the Poles were reported killed, but the numbers are not yet known. And thus, Hitler invented an excuse to invade Poland, which he did the next day. September 1st, 1939, World War II began. Well, what really happened? Alfred Helmet. Ooh, now jocks. That'll do. Yes. Received the orders from Heinrich Müller, chief of the Gestapo, to put the staged terrorist attack together at the Gleiwitz station. At Nujok's disposal were what the Germans had codenamed canned goods, which were dissenters and criminals kept alive in detention camps until the Gestapo needed a warm dead body. To add cognancy to the Gleiwitz attack, Nojoks brought along one such canned good, Franziskik Honeck. Honeck, a German from the Silesian region, was a known Polish sympathizer. Before arriving at the station, the Gestapo gave him a lethal injection. Then, they dressed him up like a Polish terrorist and brought him to the front of the radio station. Nojokes later testified, wow, he's still alive? That the man, was unconscious, but not dead yet, when he was shot full of pistol rounds. When the police and press found Honeck's body, they assumed he'd been one of the fictional Polish terrorists that attacked the station. In all, there were 21 fake terror actions along the border that same night, many of them canned goods from German prisons, so there would be plenty of bodies in the morning. Evidence of Polish attackers that had been shot in self-defense. The next day, after a long night filled with fake terror, Hitler gave a speech to the German army, complete with a synthetic anger. Becky?
Synthetic anger.
Starting with the Polish state.
Oh.
I'm sorry I surprised you. I just wanted you to do the accent.
Oh, hang on. Here we go. The Polish state has refused the peaceful settlement of relations which are desired and has appealed to arms. Germans in Poland are persecuted with bloody terror and driven from their houses. A series of violations of the frontier, intolerable to a great power, prove that Poland is no longer willing to respect the frontier of the Reich. In order to put an end to this lunacy, I have no other choice than to meet force with force from now on. The German army will fight the battle for the honor and the vital rights of reborn Germany with hard determination. I expect that every soldier mindful of the great traditions of eternal German soldiery will ever remain conscious that he is a representative of the National Socialist Greater Germany. Long live our people and our Reich!
Of course, the people responded, Heil Hitler. Had it not been... That was beautiful, by the way, Becky. I like all the phlegm sounds, too. They were really good.
They're
very real. I'll give you a minute to wipe down everything. Had it not been for the Nuremberg trials in 1945, the real story behind the Gleiwitz attack might never have been uncovered. It was there that the operations leader, Alfred Nojok's, spilled the beans in a written affidavit. Wow.
I know, right?
Yeah. It might have died with him. Had he been shot? Yeah.
Dude, I'm telling you. Now, which brings us to one of my favorite apparent false flags. I can see people enjoyed my Hitler
absolutely
rendition.
I'm getting Hitler overload.
I was channeling the man himself.
That's a reason why Mackie and I are not in power of a country.
There you go. I think we should have that on our channel.
it should be our bumper. Do you know, Mackie? I just want to put that out there. Because I'm all in favor of rods from God and carpet bombing, but they're not allowed apparently anymore. So, that puts me out of the running.
Oh, you're killing me. All right, but let's talk about my favorite potential false flag, which is the myth of Pearl Harbor. On Sunday morning, December 7, 1941. It's interesting how these false flags all are, falling to very close time frames here. 1941, the Japanese launched a sneak attack at Pearl Harbor that decimated the U.S. Pacific Fleet and forced the United States to enter World War II. In reality, there was no sneak attack. The Pacific Fleet was far from destroyed, and furthermore, the United States took great pains to bring about the assault. On January 27, 1941, Joseph C. Grew, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, wired Washington that he had learned of the surprise attack Japan was preparing for Pearl Harbor. On September 24, a dispatch from Japanese naval intelligence to Japan's consul general in Honolulu was deciphered. The transmission was a request for a grid of exact locations of ships in Pearl Harbor. Surprisingly, Washington chose not to share this information with the officers at Pearl Harbor. Then, on November 26, the main body of the Japanese strike force, consisting of 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 8 tankers, 23 fleet submarines, and 5 midget submarines, departed Japan for Hawaii. Despite the myth that the strike force maintained strict radio silence, U.S. naval intelligence intercepted and translated many dispatches. And there was no shortage of dispatches. Tokyo sent over 1,000 transmissions to the attack fleet before it reached Hawaii. Although many ships were damaged at Pearl Harbor, they were all old and slow. The main targets of the Japanese attack fleet was the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers. But Roosevelt made sure that these were safe from the attack. In November, at about the same time as the Japanese attack fleet left Japan, Roosevelt sent the Lexington and the Enterprise out to sea. Meanwhile, the Saratoga was in San Diego. Because Japan had signed a mutual defense pact with Germany and Italy, Roosevelt knew war with Japan was a legitimate backdoor to joining the war in Europe. On October 7, 1940, one of Roosevelt's military advisors, Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum, wrote a memo detailing an 8-step plan that would provoke Japan into attacking the United States. Over the next year, Roosevelt implemented all 8 of the recommended actions. In the summer of 1941, the US joined England in an oil embargo against Japan. Japan needed oil for its war with China and had no remaining option but to invade the East Indies and Southeast Asia to get new resources. And that required getting rid of the US Pacific Fleet first. Although Roosevelt may have got more than he bargained for, he clearly let the attack on Pearl Harbor happen and even helped Japan by making sure their attack was a surprise. He did this by withholding information from Pearl Harbor's commanders and even by ensuring the attack force wasn't accidentally discovered by commercial shipping traffic. As Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner stated in 1941, "We were prepared to divert traffic when we believed war was imminent. We sent the traffic down via the Torres Strait so that the track of the Japanese task force would be clear of any traffic." Now, while not a false flag in the true sense of the word, allowing an enemy force to attack you knowingly would pretty much provoke a result, and then also, foster a certain outcome, in my book, firmly lives in the false flag textbook. So letting something happen or doing it yourself, I don't see much of a difference
either. No.
Yeah. Shocking.
Because they perpetuated the lie for long enough. I know, right? So, in the Israeli terrorist cell uncovered in Egypt. In July 1954, an Israeli terrorist cell was activated inside Egypt. The ensuing attacks, cleverly designed to look like the work of Arabs, blasted and torched American and British targets. First, the Israeli terrorists firebombed the Alexandria post office. Then, they firebombed the US Information Agency libraries, one in Alexandria and one in Cairo. Then they firebombed a British-owned Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Theatre, a railway terminal, the Central Post Office, and a couple more theatres. In the early 1950s, the United States was making fast friends with Egypt, taking advantage of the new pan-Arab Egyptian government of Gamal Abdel Nasser. The warming relationship between the US and Egypt caused a very insecure Israel to feel threatened. Nasser also had plans, Nassar, also had plans to nationalize the Suez Canal, which had been controlled by the British for decades. Egypt had been known to blockade Israeli shipping through the canal, and Israel feared Nasser would make a blockade permanent. After US President Eisenhower began encouraging the British to leave the Suez Canal zone, Israel started looking for a way to make the British stay. In a way to remain best buddies with America. And what better way to treat your best friend than to stab them in the back and tell them one of your other friends did it? David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding prime minister, thought that the Egyptian terrorist attacks against Americans would be a perfect way to cool the growing US-Egypt relationship. Since there were no Egyptians planning attacks against Americans, Ben-Gurion's protégés did the next best thing. They recruited Israeli agents to pretend to be Egyptian terrorists. The top-secret Israeli terrorist cell, Unit 131, had existed since 1948, when Unit 131 member Philip Nathanson was identified as one of the terrorists who had been blowing up American and British buildings. The plot began to unravel. Nathanson was interrogated by Egypt's military intelligence and confessed the whole plot, which led to more arrests. When the Israeli spies were given a public trail, all the details of their terrorist training in Israel came to light. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ben-Gurion and Israel's Amman chief Binyamin Ghibli tried to frame their own defense minister Pinhas Lavon. They even offered forged documents as proof. The frame-up worked for a while, so much so that the entire incident was still popularly known as the Lavon affair. Lavon resigned and Ben-Gurion came out of political retirement to replace him as Israel's defense minister. However, the truth did finally emerge. In 1960, a review of the inquiry discovered the fake documents as well as perjury by Siedenberg. A committee of 7 cabinet members cleared Lavon. Although Ben-Gurion never admitted fault, he did resign his post as defense minister. Wow. All right, next, number 8. In 1962, this is Operation Northwoods. In 1962, the US Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously proposed state-sponsored acts of terrorism on American soil against American citizens, no less. The head of every branch of the US Armed Forces gave written approval to sink US ships, shoot down hijacked American planes, and gun down and bomb civilians on the streets of Washington, D.C. and Miami. The idea was to blame the self-inflicted terrorism on Cuba's leader, Fidel Castro, so the American public would beg and scream for the Marines to storm Havana. The public learned about Operation Northwoods 35 years later, when the top-secret document was declassified by the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Review Board. Among other things, Operation Northwoods proposed faking the crash of an American passenger plane. The disaster was to be accomplished by faking a commercial flight from the US to Jamaica and having the plane boarded at a public airport by CIA agents disguised as college students going on vacation. An empty remote control plane would follow the commercial flight as it left Florida. The commercial flight's pilots would radio for help, mention that they had been attacked by a Cuban fighter, then land in secret at Eglin Air Force Base. The empty remote control plane would then be blown out of the sky and the public would be told all the poor college students aboard were killed. Using a possible NASA disaster, astronaut John Glenn's death, as a pretext to launch the war, the plan called for manufacturing various pieces of evidence which would prove electronic interference on the part of the Cubans if something went wrong with NASA's third manned space launch. Blowing up buildings in Washington and in Miami, Cuban agents, undercover CIA agents, would be arrested and they would confess to the bombings. In addition, false documents proving Castro's involvement in the attacks would be found and given to the press. Attacking an American military base in Guantanamo with CIA recruits posing as Cuban mercenaries. This involved blowing up the ammunition depot and would obviously result in material damages and many dead, and those would be American troops. As a last resort, the plan even mentioned bribing one of Castro's commanders to initiate the Guantanamo attack. That deserves repeating. The Pentagon considered using US tax dollars to bribe another country's military to attack US troops in order to instigate a full-scale war. Operation Northwoods was only one of several plans under the umbrella of Operation Mongoose. Shortly after the Joint Chiefs of Staff signed and presented the plan in March 1962, President Kennedy, still smarting from the Bay of Pigs fiasco, declared that he would never authorize a military invasion of Cuba. In September, Kennedy died. Wow, let me see. March it was when he said he would never do it. And then in September, Kennedy denied the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Lyman Limnitzer, a second term as the nation's highest-ranking military officer. And by the winter of 1963, Kennedy was dead. He was killed, apparently, by a Cuban sympathizer in the streets of an American city. Good grief. I always thought Kennedy was killed because he wanted to have back the currency with gold. Plus, he'd told someone too many secrets that he was having an affair with, or an intimate relationship with. Oh, number 9 out of 10. Phantoms in the Gulf of Tonkin. And this is the Bay of Tonkin. The thing that I said at the beginning of the hour. On August 2nd, 1964, 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked a US destroyer, the USS Maddox. The boats reportedly fired torpedoes at the US ship in international waters in the Gulf of Tonkin, about 30 miles off the coast of Vietnam. On August 4th, 2 days later, the US Navy reported another unprovoked attack on the US Maddox and the USS Turner Joy. Within hours, President Lyndon B. Johnson ordered a retaliatory strike. As the bases for North Vietnamese torpedo boats were bombed, Johnson went on TV and told America, "Repeated acts of violence against the armed forces of the United States must be met not only with alert defense, but with a positive reply. That reply is being given as I speak tonight." The next day, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara assured Capitol Hill that the Maddox had only been carrying out a routine mission of the type we carry out all over the world at all times. McNamara said that the two boats were in no way involved with recent South Vietnamese boat raids against North Vietnamese targets. At Johnson's request, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The resolution pre-approved any military actions Johnson would take. It gave Johnson a free ticket to wage war in Vietnam, as large as the president wanted. But by 1969, over 500,000 US troops were fighting in Indochina. Despite McNamara's testimony to the contrary, the USS Maddox had been providing intelligence support to South Vietnamese boats carrying out raids against North Vietnam. McNamara had also testified that these were unequivocal proof of an unprovoked second attack against the USS Maddox. In fact, the second attack never occurred at all. At the time of the second incident, the two USS destroyers misinterpreted radar and the radar signals as attacks by the North Vietnamese Navy. It's now known that no North Vietnamese boats were in the area. So, for 2 hours, the two US destroyers blasted away at non-existent radar targets and vigorously maneuvered to avoid phantom North Vietnamese ships. Even though the second attack only involved two US ships defending themselves against a non-existent enemy, the President and the Secretary of Defense used it to coerce Congress and the American people to start a war neither of them wanted or needed. After the Vietnam War turned into a quagmire, Congress decided to put limits on the President's authority to unilaterally wage war. Thus, on November 7th, 1973, Congress overturned President Nixon's veto and passed the War Powers Resolution. The resolution requires the President to consult with Congress before making any decisions that engage the US military in hostilities. It is still in effect to this day. Number 10, 1999 Russian invasion of Chechnya. Let me see, 539. Cool. Another possible example involving Russia occurred in 1999. Following a series of bombings believed to be carried out by Chechen militants, several people were apprehended planting a large bag of explosives in front of an apartment building in the city of Ryazan, said Scott Radnitz, an associate professor of Russian and Eurasian studies at the University of Washington. They were revealed, he says, to be from the Security Services, or FSB. The FSB did not disavow them, but instead claimed they were doing a training exercise and the bags were full of sugar. The episode was used as the basis for a Russian military campaign in Chechnya and boosted the career of the relatively unknown then Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Radnitz said, if this operation was engineered by the government, it would check all the boxes to qualify as a false flag operation, and a momentous one. A momentous one, not monumentous, momentous one. That's what I said. All right, number 11. This is the September 11, 2001 attacks. And this is going to get people upset, but I'm reading from text, and the text came from the internet, and I'm happy to share that with anyone who requests it. Like many buildings built in the 1970s, the Twin Towers were constructed with vast quantities of cancer-causing asbestos. The cost of removing the Twin Towers asbestos? Well, a year's worth of revenues at a minimum, at least, because they've shut the entire building down, possibly as much as the value of the buildings themselves. The cost to disassemble the Twin Towers floor by floor would have run into the double-digit billions. In addition, the Port Authority was prohibited from demolishing the towers because the resulting asbestos dust would cover the entire city, which it did when they collapsed, resulting in many cancers with a confirmed link to the WTC dust. Despite its questionable status, in January of 2001, Larry Silverstein made a $3.2 billion bid for the World Trade Center. On July 24th, same year, the Port Authority accepted the offer. Silverstein then took out an insurance policy that, understandably, covered terrorist attacks, which happened 7 weeks later. To date, Silverstein has been awarded almost $5 billion from the 9 different insurance companies. What was an asbestos nightmare turned into a $1.8 billion profit within 7 weeks. Donald Rumsfeld said about the Pentagon on the morning of September 10th, the day before, 2001, according to some estimates, we cannot track 2.3 trillion in transactions. That bombshell was pretty much forgotten by the next morning. So, as a reward for losing $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, taxpayers patriotically forked over another $370 billion and counting to invade Iraq. This is from whenever the text was written. True to form, the Pentagon promptly lost $9 billion of that money too. 8 days after the attacks, the 342-page Patriot Act was given to Congress. That same week, letters armed with anthrax and from a US military lab entered the mail. Subsequently, and that's alleged, by the way. Subsequently, while congressional officers were evacuated, examined, cleaned, and nasal cavities swabbed, the Patriot Act remained largely unread. Then, with a little debate, the Patriot Act became law, giving the Bush administration unprecedented power to access people's medical records, tax records, information about the books they bought or borrowed, and the power to conduct secret residential searches without notifying owners that their homes had been searched. In early 2001, executives from Shell, BP, and Exxon met with Dick Cheney's Energy Task Force while it was developing its new national energy policy. Later, the companies freely admitted interest in profiting from Iraq's oil fields even before the US invaded Iraq. And now, a new Iraq hydrocarbon law expected to pass in March. This is back before 2007, which will open the door for international investors led by BP, Exxon, and Shell to siphon off 75% of Iraq oil wealth for the next 30 years. According to the statements by Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer, a Bronze Star recipient with 22 years of experience in intelligence operations, a classified intelligence program codenamed Able Danger, had uncovered 2 of the 3 9/11 terrorist cells a year before the attacks and had identified 4 of the hijackers. Schaefer alerted the FBI in September of 2000, a year before, but the meeting he tried to set up with Bureau officials were repeatedly blocked by military lawyers. 4 credible witnesses have come forward to verify Schaefer's claims. In August of 2001, a Pan Am International Flight Academy instructor warned the FBI that a student, Zacharias Moussaoui, might use a commercial plane loaded with fuel as a weapon. Moussaoui was then arrested on immigration charges, but despite the repeated urging of the school and local agents, FBI headquarters refused a deeper investigation. The US also received dozens of detailed warnings, names, locations, dates from the intelligence agencies of Indonesia, Great Britain, Germany, Egypt, Italy, Jordan, India, Argentina, Morocco, Russia, Israel, France, and even the Taliban themselves. It would seem that the entire world was onto the bungling Saudi hijackers and somewhat perplexed that the US wasn't taking preventative actions. But in each case, the US, as if by design, allegedly, chose not to investigate. Instead, Condoleezza Rice, now there's a name I haven't heard for a while, on May 16th, 2002, stated, "I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon." I think she missed a plane or two. We also know that on the morning of 9/11, multiple Air Force war games and drills were in progress. The hijackers would never have made it to their targets without these war games. Operation Northern Vigilance ensured that many jet fighters that would have normally been patrolling the East Coast were flying over Alaska and northern Canada in a drill that simulated a Russian air attack, complete with false radar blips. Remarkably, Operation Vigilant Guardian simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern sector, while real hijackers were in the same airspace. This drill had NORAD and the Air Force reacting to false blips on FAA radar screens. Some of these blips corresponded to real military aircraft in the air posing as hijacked aircraft. That's why NORAD's airborne control officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dawn Deskins, heard Boston claim it hijacked an airliner. Her first words were, "It must be part of the exercise." Wow. It's extraordinary, the things you find out in hindsight, right? MK Ultra. Yeah, I remember you. All right, this is a very short one. I think I can get two of the short ones done. So this is number 12, Little Green Men in Crimea, 2014. In the early days of Russia's annexation of Crimea, people started to appear on the streets who were dressed and armed exactly like Russian soldiers, but without Russian insignia on their uniforms. The Kremlin insisted these were members of local self-defense groups who wanted the territory to be returned from Ukrainian control to Russia. The Kremlin said they had bought their clothing and equipment from shops. Russian journalists took to calling these people polite men, while local residents in Crimea called them little green men, referring both to the colour of the uniforms and their unconfirmed origin. Very cute. Okay, number 13, Kashmir border, 2020. India and Pakistan have often accused each other of mounting false flag attacks along the disputed Kashmir border in order to provoke a military conflict. In 2020, Pakistan's foreign ministry accused Indian troops of firing on a vehicle containing UN observers on the Pakistan side of the border, hoping the UN might think Pakistani troops were responsible. It said India was trying to sow discord between Pakistan and the international community, and Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, ex-cricketer, called the move reckless. India denied the accusation and in turn blamed Pakistan for failing to keep its own side of the border safe. Wow. Now, this one's called Changing Colours. If you follow the money, you can see that the people with the most to gain occupied the key military and civilian positions to help 9/11 happen, allegedly, as well as to cover up the crime. Such is the hallmark of false flag operations throughout history, but the incredible scale, the alleged scale of the 9/11 sham, and the sheer number of people who still refuse to see the mountain of truth in front of their eyes, that's what makes the September 11, 2001 attacks the greatest false flag operation of all time. Now, Hermann Goering stated, "Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in America, nor in Germany. That is understood. But after all, It is the leaders of the country who determine policy. And it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or even a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf, a book still forbidden in some countries, such as France, for instance, wrote, "In the size of the lie, there is always contained a certain factor of credibility, since the great masses of the people will more easily fall victim to a great lie than to a small one." I think that's really pertinent. Hang on, 544 is the next show. Now we're coming to the end. We've only got, what is it, 5 minutes maybe left, and I'd like to take this time to suggest that the next show coming up, which should be Jer Bear's awesome after hours show, where he plays a bit of music, has a bit of a chat, has a bit of fun. You can be a caller and you can dial in and be part of his show. Because just remember, that's where we started. I started by calling into this Blue Monkey show, and now I've got a show of my own. So don't be afraid. It's not that daunting to call in. In fact, I was on air back in the 2000s on a commercial station here in Sydney, and I've dialed into radio shows quite often, and at one point I won $24,000 in a radio competition, which I was extremely pleased. And without that, I would not have been able to move into my house, my new house, because that paid for the removalist. Thank you for participating. And it's a good thing. Just remember that, radio needs to be played across many mediums, and through that there is controls around what you can and can't say, how you're supposed to speak. And I suppose that's really important. You could be you, but just don't swear. You could be you and not be slanderous or what are all the other negative words that can get you into trouble. Don't blame someone, accuse someone of something. Don't call someone something that you can't back up with any facts. And even if you can, you got to be very careful. Remember all those lawsuits against all of the famous people had against news media for defamation. You can't say anything that might defame someone. So just honestly, if you haven't heard me say the word allege for the last half an hour, I'd be mistaken. I'll be letting myself down and open to recourse. Yeah, and I don't have any money. I don't want that kind of thing. Anyway, look, it's been a great 2 hours with you guys. I'm just going to have a little call out to the chat room. Maced is with us. I can see nobody, and I can see some bots posting some things, and I don't know whether they're bots or not. Goodness me, I've seen some auto replies as well. So when someone's talking about something, I see something get posted. Amiga Logos is prevalent, always there. Great, always tells us how good our audio is. And I can see nobody is typing. It's an avatar called Nobody. So, what do you think about false flags? Have you seen any recently? Is there one going on right now, possibly? Oh, and there's Mace saying thank you. is there anything happening that you would see in the media? And I know that Crimea had an airport that blew up, and so did Belarus had an airport that blew up. And the distance to fire, to engage, if it was Ukrainian, would have been just absolutely enormous, 260 miles or some crazy thing, and they're not supposed to have weapons that can go that far. So you have to wonder, is that if you blow it up and then blame the Ukrainians, that's interesting, but Russia didn't. They blamed themselves. Wow, that went quick. There we go. So stay tuned for Jer Bear's awesome show. This is the end of 2 hours of David Mackey on Shiny Side Out, episode 543. Next week, it'll be 544, and in the meantime, you can listen to us on Plato's Cave, Tuesday and Thursday nights. Take care, guys, and we'll see you next week.